Hello and welcome to CISLL Presents, a language and literacy podcast. We are the Center for the Interdisciplinary Study of Language and Literacy at Northern Illinois University. I am Suhey Gomez, Graduate Assistant for CISLL, and I'm joined today by Dr. Allison Gladfelter and Dr. Lisa Goffman. Dr. Allison Gladfelter is an Associate Professor in the School of Allied Health and Communication Disorders at Northern Illinois University. Dr. Gladfelter research explores language acquisition, word learning, and language and motor relationships in neurodiverse children. Our guest here today, Dr. Lisa Goffman, is a senior scientist and Mary Pat Mahler Chair of Child Language in the Center of Childhood Deafness, Language, and Learning at Boys Town National Research Hospital. Prior to her research career, she was a speech and language pathologist in a transdisciplinary early intervention program. The central aim of her research is to develop an account of developmental language disorder that translates findings about shared motor and cognitive processes to the development of effective assessment and intervention practices. Her work has been funded continuously by the National Institute of Health, National Institute of Deafness, and other communication disorders.
Welcome. Lisa, thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your background.
Yes, as the introduction pointed out, I originally started as a clinical speech-language pathologist working with infants and toddlers and their families in a highly interdisciplinary intervention program. And through that work, I became very, very interested in the factors that contribute to optimal development in infants and toddlers. And I realized that there was very little science backing up some of the clinical observations that I and my fellow clinicians were making. So I decided to go back and get a PhD and try to begin to remedy this situation by looking at language and motor development in children with developmental language disorder. And I have not solved the problem yet, but it has been a really exciting, fun research career, and I think we've discovered a great deal about how developmental domains interact in these children with DLD who are very understudied, undertreated, and defined by their language disorder, but it turns out that there are many other factors influencing their development as well.
Mm-hmm. And how did you get interested in developmental language disorders?
So, yes, my interest could have gone so many directions at that point. I could have very easily focused on autism, speech sound disorders. I was also very interested in psychosocial disorders clinically. But DLD was the perfect test case because it was defined by a unitary single dimension language. I was the most interested in language, and yet it involved speech, it involved cognition, it involved so many other elements that became really, really interesting.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you decided to go back and get your PhD and to add the science to go back. And so I'm curious if you could please show us or share with us some recent developments or findings in your research that you have found to be particularly interesting or significant.
Okay. So originally, the work was very motivated by this result that children defined by their language problems have motor problems. That's a very simple story. I'd say the most, and the trajectory has been complex over many, many years. But the most interesting current work, among others, I'll select one topic that is especially intriguing to me right now. And this was work done in collaboration with Dr. Luann Gherkin, who is a psycholinguistic linguist who studies early development. She studies sound pattern learning in infants, and she made this discovery. I'm going to talk about her work a little bit. She made this discovery that typically learning infants can learn a very simple statistical rule that adults could not learn. And conversely, that adults could learn a very simple rule that infants could not learn. And in our conversation together, we realized that the baby rule really related to morphosyntactic sequences It's basically if you have a consonant that's called a voiced consonant at the beginning of a word, like B or D or V, and you have a middle consonant that's also voiced, that's called a second order OR rule. And babies can learn that voiced and voiced go together, and voiceless go together. Adults, believe it or not, on the fly cannot learn that. And we realized this could really relate to morphosyntax and to a fundamental cognitive problem that our kids with DLD are experiencing. So we kind of built a big theoretical account, and it gave these ideas about DLD a developmental foothold, about what babies and adults can learn and how that relates even to second language learning and to sensitivity to grammatical rules. So we're looking at that rule now even in hand sequence learning, in speech sequence learning, and the idea of being able to see this very specific problem in learning particular statistical sequences and link that to development is one of the more exciting things going on.
Yeah.
I picked something kind of hard.
No, I think that's interesting. Is that, would you say, different than traditional models of DLD?
Very much so. I think traditional models of DLD are very deficit-based. The learner has a problem with the basal ganglia that influences their ability to learn procedural tasks, for example, and to really have this strong developmental grounding was a very novel approach that Luann and I found very exciting. Mm-hmm. Grounding it in real development.
Yeah. What potential applications or implications does your research have either in your field or beyond your field?
Yeah, so I do a lot of pretty interdisciplinary research. I've worked with kinesiologists like Howard Zelaznik. I've worked with psychologists like Luann Gherkin and Sebastian Healy. I've worked with engineers like Alan Whistler. So I tend to be very interdisciplinary in my approach. Or we do collectively together now because we're research teams now. And so I think there are implications regarding kind of more global aspects of learning that even people in more basic areas like computational speech areas, psycholinguistics are interested in. Just kind of general themes about learning. So that's one path. And then the second path would be clinical. Mm-hmm. So as we learn that children with DLD have a broader and more general kind of cognitive deficit, it really opens the door to new approaches to assessment. Maybe we need to include broader cognitive tasks like certain statistical learning tasks or motor tasks into our assessment regimens. That's one path. And then in intervention, if this indeed characterizes their deficit, or at least one aspect of their deficit, I would never be so bold as to think it characterizes everything. I think this also has potential. We've done lots of learning studies now. In collaboration with Dr. Gladfelter, we've looked at how certain semantic cues, for example, can scaffold these statistical learning or sequential deficits. So I think it allows you to think of things in a brand new way that I hope eventually makes its way back to the clinic where I started. As you dig into being a scientist, you get a little more basic and a little less practical.
Yeah, and I know we've chatted a little bit before, but I think it's really interesting to think about how some of these non-linguistic tasks could actually help with assessment of children who are bilingual.
Yes.
Can you speak to that a little bit more?
Yes. So a very significant problem space in our field is that if you are a speech pathologist and you have a child in front of you whose come into I'm going to be English-centric, but who's walking into an English-speaking classroom and comes, and until they were 4 years old, their home language was Turkish or Spanish or Cantonese. They walk into your classroom and they spend some time in it, for example, and they're having difficulty learning to speak. And it's a real problem to determine, is their difficulty something that obligates intervention, or is it just giving them time? Do they actually have DLD, for example? And this is a huge difficulty in the literature. And what people tend to do is either under-identify these kids, they actually have a real problem, but they're not being served, or over-identify them and serve them when they're not having a problem. So if you could take a child, for example, and this is all next steps imaginary a little bit, but if you could take a child who teachers are saying, this child isn't learning as quickly, but we don't know a lot about their language, it may be competing, it may be, we don't know why, and if you could incorporate some of these non-linguistic kinds of learning tasks, you might be able to put together a profile that suggests that this child is more likely to really have risk because they have this other set of non-linguistic problems with sequencing. This child has no other problems, let's give them a little bit more time. That is one, it is again, don't take this as clinical advice, please, but it is a direction that we think this work could go to address this very significant problem out there in clinical service delivery.
Yeah, that would be really helpful if it could increase more accurate diagnoses and allocation of services.
Exactly.
Limited resources
yes.
more appropriately.
Yes, absolutely. I think so.
What kind of responses do you usually receive when you present your findings or discuss these findings with others?
Yeah, this has been an interesting career because early on, I think people were very skeptical of me. So there's a pretty deep set of scientists in my area who really made a very strong argument. The DLD used to be called specific language impairment, and these scientists made a very strong argument, for example, that these children have difficulty with tense and agreement grammatical morphemes, meaning they have trouble with things like he runs versus they run, like that, marking that S. So tense and agreement, is it past tense, is it present tense? How does that map to whether it's a singular or a plural pronoun? That's actually a really interesting sequential task, being able to do that. But it was a very narrow definition. And I remember when I published one of my earliest papers, it was about speech variability, which is something I study, speech motor problems in kids with, at the time, specific language impairment. And I was made to change that title of that paper to children with language, I probably shouldn't be saying this, to children with speech and language
interesting
disorders rather than specific language impairment. And that, I think that's just an example that people were very resistant. And the discipline saw this as a very narrow disorder. And people were very resistant to thinking about these broader factors being actually part of the disorder. So I had to pretty much fight for my position early on with grant writing, with publishing. I believed in it, I stuck with it, and now it's actually quite accepted. And other people have done work in the area as well. But early on, it was pretty challenging.
I'm thinking about some of the models that you have discussed before, where in language models or speech models, and that they do not overlap.
They do not overlap. Now, when we speak, it's obvious. I mean, listen to me right now. It's a very hard motor task that I'm having some difficulty with, like coordinating your lips, your tongue, your jaw, your breathing, your larynx when you're turning on your vocal folds. That is like an incredibly hard task. And that has to be coordinated with the formulation of ideas, of how you sequence those ideas. So honestly, if I think about it, it's impossible that we talk. And then,
Yeah.
and then I almost think people have to organize it separately because it's such a hard problem space.
Mm-hmm.
So people look at the speech motor, how you move your tongue, lips, and jaw separately from how you get the ideas and turn them into words and sentences.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, they have to come together.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. And I know we've had conversations too about the motor piece, that if you want to speak or write by hand or use gestures or signs, you still have to use motor skills. You cannot get
Yes.
away from the motor component.
No. And I think this applies. I've focused on DLD, but you focus on autism, typical development, people like Jenna Iverson.
Mm-hmm.
It's just part of the process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that it needs to come together.
Mm-hmm.
So you've kind of touched on this already, but I might ask you to elaborate either on how this informed your earliest work or how you see it moving forward. But can you describe some of the ways you have to rely on interdisciplinary aspects?
Mm-hmm.
We are the Center for the Interdisciplinary Study of Language and Literacy, so if
Yeah.
you can speak more to that interdisciplinary
Sure.
piece.
You are on the cutting edge of thinking about these interdisciplinary domains, and I am very impressed with what you're doing here. So yeah, the work I do is fundamentally interdisciplinary. Even within my own discipline, I started out very much a language and phonology, which is the language side of how you organize speech sounds, researcher. And serendipitously, my beloved mentor at the time, a couple years into my doctoral program, decided to go take a new job. I've been known to do that to people too. And I could have gone with him, but instead I decided that my clinical background, that it was maybe time. I talked with a scientist named Ann Smith, who was a stuttering, hardcore speech motor, like electromyography, kinematics, needle electrodes in the larynx, I mean hardcore speech motor scientist. And we spoke standing in a parking lot one day and decided we should link and put these areas together. And so that is like very local interdisciplinary, and that turned out, I loved my old mentor, and he's still like a very important person in my training in my life, but it turned out putting those areas together was like the best thing that could have happened to me. So that, it started out very interdisciplinary, and then as I mentioned, my collaborators often come from other disciplines, and they introduce new methodologies, network science, signal processing, psycholinguistics and statistical learning in infants. So my work has been completely motivated by interdisciplinary efforts, and it has opened amazing new doors that would never have been if all my collaborators were like me. So I really admire what you're doing here.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think I appreciate that you mentioned even local interdisciplinary, because I know that our fields, education, speech language pathology, psychology, are so diverse even within each of these fields.
Yes.
I think that's nice to think about ways we could bridge
That's right.
topic areas, but even still within the same field.
That's right. In some ways, speech language pathology is not really a field. It's a field made up of linguistics, speech physiology, and then I won't even touch the auditory side. So, it's made
and swallowing.
up. And swallowing. So it's really made up of other fields.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a real gift, and I think people get too siloed too quickly. So that's why I appreciate what you all are doing to try to open those doors.
Yeah. So I have some more maybe personal questions for you. One is, what advice would you give someone interested in pursuing research in the same areas that you have expertise in?
Yeah. To me, the most motivating and interesting piece is being curious and going to talks that you think you're not interested in at all, for example. if you asked me, every single time I say I'm never going to do X, within 2 years I'm doing X. That's what it felt like for a while. I hate speech motor control. I hate physiology. I mean, every time that's what I ended up doing. And I mentioned earlier today, you'll probably filter that out, but some of the best ideas we've had have been these random either conversations or talks in, again, in network science, in birdsong, in these topics that I didn't even imagine would pull into my research program. So to me, I think we get so focused, and we get so focused as we move along on high impact publications and getting out as much as we can. And I think sometimes stepping back and just letting curiosity wash over you is one of the best things you could do. When someone walks into my lab, I don't know if I used to do this, but I now just suggest, even if they walk in with I want to study, I'm interested in the motor part of what you do. I'm interested in the phonological part of what you do. I'm like, just back off from that for a few months and engage in everything we do in our lab. You pointed out engage in other labs, and I think that's a really good idea. And we'll talk weekly, and in about 4 to 6 months, we'll begin to focus what you're doing. Mm-hmm. So I think curiosity and exploration are really underrated.
I love that you embody that. I'm thinking not even just other labs, but I know I personally approached you and I knew you studied DLD, and I said, but what about autism? and I know you also are exploring cochlear implants now as well, and you're looking into these bilingual uses. So I think it's really interesting too that not even just different methodologies or different labs, but even different populations.
Yes. And the cochlear implant thing came up because I have a colleague who, she's really like an engineer, and she's a cochlear implant person, but she's interested in prosody. And we started talking, and she was like, she was very focused on perceptual cues, pitch cues, and I'm like, but what about linguistic prosody? And don't some of your people, your children and adults within, children I'm going to say, prelingually deafened implant users, don't some of them have problems with like morphosyntax and phonology? That's like the core here. And it's like, yeah. And so we're deciding, so that is kind of the anchor for looking at some linguistic as well as emotional prosody studies together. And we've just started that project. So I'm pretty excited about it. But it was very like a random conversation with someone I really like, who I'm like, you'd be fun to work with, and this is a great question. Because for hearing, we base it on the perceptual input they're receiving and when they received it. But so I think it just opens this whole additional set of interesting problems that we can look at. This is a very new area. I can't talk about it very well or clearly, but I'm excited about it.
I'm excited, yes. So exploring and being more curious seems like a nice strategy.
And I don't think we cultivate that very well, so I will amplify it,
Yeah, and some of those in-person connections. It sounds like you've had a lot of new ideas from conversations.
Yes.
And so talking to people, maybe for students listening, like go have those conversations with your peers or with other faculty or colleagues or your teachers. Go to office hours.
No, go to office hours, talk to people, and don't talk to the people only the people who you think align with you already. Talk to people who are going to think differently from you.
What is your favorite aspect of the work you do?
Oh, so many things. I have recently transitioned to a job that I love that's 100% research. I have an amazing lab, but one of the best things in my whole career has been mentoring, especially doctoral students. I've enjoyed that so much. The uncovering. People approach research in many, many different ways. Some people do lots of work in lots of different areas. I am very what I would call programmatic. I started with a problem, and I've worked to unpack that problem for now decades. And so it has been very, very exciting to have that problem space unfold and be really different than what I anticipated. That's the most exciting thing.
Yeah.
Those two things. Really mentoring and then that part of the science.
If there's one key message you'd like our listeners to take away from our conversation today, what would it be?
I think I've embedded it in a lot of places. That research is extremely fun, that it takes you in really to really surprising places, that curiosity and cross-domain interaction, such as being provided by your center, are just such great ways to pursue this work. And I came in as a clinician, and I almost, when I went back to get my PhD, I was like, I talked to my mentor, who had been my master's thesis mentor, and I said, what if I want to leave in a year? Do I really have to do this? Do I have to stay? And he said, just come as long as you want. And I stayed for like 25 years before I left Purdue. So be open to that side, even, no matter what, be open to clinical work, research work, we have to do it all in the end. And I think a research career is very exciting. It is harder now. We have some new challenges. And I know I meet with a lot of my early career trainees and really spend a lot of time talking about flexibility and staying the course in the face of some brand new challenges that we're all experiencing. And so I don't want to, I do need to say that I'm aware that the career has changed since I walked into it. But I still have to believe that it's extremely exciting, and discovery is just really, really fun. And so I'm really recommending staying the course. And people are finding really excellent ways to be scientists in new ways, I think, in our current climate.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
You can have me redo that one.
No, I'm just thinking of, it seems like what I'm hearing is to be flexible, but also to be adaptable and resilient. Yeah. And if you have these curiosities, to continue pursuing them.
Yes.
Even
you
if they're
it very well.
Do you have, and you've mentioned a couple, so maybe this is redundant, but do you have any current or upcoming projects that you haven't yet discussed that you are excited about?
Really, the two new things are the cochlear implant kids and the bilingual project. I've also spoken with a lot of scientists lately about trying to explore applying some of the same ideas to late talkers, to really young children, and adapting some of these tasks to that age group. And then another project that I have not mentioned yet is with Leah Sack and Sebastian Healy, who's a psychologist at Purdue, and Luann Gherkin. We have begun to translate a lot of our speech measures into the manual domain in some of these sequence learning tasks, and I find that to be a very exciting new endeavor to really unpack how domain general some of these cognitive tasks that we've looked at in language really are.
Okay, so our listeners need to stay tuned for some of these upcoming projects. Now you're on a time clock.
Oh my God, I most definitely am.
When can
we won't talk about why.
I think my last question is, basically, is there anything else you'd like to add or share with our audience before we wrap up?
I just want to once again commend your center, and I have visited today, in case the audience doesn't know that. I got to give a talk, and more importantly, I got to listen to talks, and just that you're incorporating math and biology. And today I started thinking, wow, how children learn math problems may really relate to some of these complex learning mechanisms. So just to commend what you're trying to do here and what you are succeeding at doing. I think it's the way that both clinical and basic science needs to move forward.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. We really appreciate you being here as well. And thank you for sharing with us some of your insights and advice. And we look forward to seeing your research as it comes out.
Thanks, Allison. Thanks, everybody.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to CISLL Presents a Language and Literacy podcast. Our intro music was Heal the World, performed by the NIU SEAL Band. If you enjoyed this episode, consider sharing it with a colleague, student, or friend who might be interested, and make sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts.